in Arkansas, my former life, I was really close friends with what turned out to be a Hall of Fame football coach. He won all these state titles in high school, and currently he coaches in the SEC at the college level at a school that is other than Arkansas. And so now I root against him on a weekly basis. But we had this tremendous friendship, and it began over lunch. I'd asked him to lunch. We went to lunch. And one day we're sitting there talking, and he says, you and I have a lot in common professionally. And I said, oh, really, how so? And he said, we both have jobs in which we have to do something so that we can get to do something. He said, you want to change lives. That's what you want to do. But what you have to do is build a church, bring in an offering, draw a crowd. And if you do that, then you get the opportunity to change lives. He said, I want to build young boys into men. That's what I want to do. He says, in order to get to do that, what I have to do is win football games. Because if I don't win football games, I don't get the opportunity then to do what it is that I want to do. So we're doing one thing in order to get to do something else. Whenever we start talking about skills in marriage, the mistake that people make with skills in marriage is they think the skill is about the actual skill. They think that the skill is about the actual issue at hand. So the idea of knowing how to handle money, they think the big issue there is, well, we got to learn how to handle money so that we can learn how to handle money. Whereas what we're going to focus on over all these sessions is the truth that whatever it is that we're working in that specific session, that is what we have to do in order to get to do what we want to do, which is actually make an emotional connection with each other. And so in the previous session, we talked about, even from a therapeutic standpoint, the difference between emotionally focused therapy, in which we're looking at the connection that we have with each other, and cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're looking at a change of habits and behaviors. And that for so many years, the fixation in marriage counseling was on cognitive behavioral therapy. If we can just teach you to do things differently, to fight differently, to handle money, to prioritize sex, if we can just get you to do the skills properly, then that will lead to a good marriage. But what they found was that doing the skills properly, apart from having a true emotional connection, having affection for one another, simply made the divorce much more peaceful. And so the priority, first and foremost, is the heart. It's the affection. It's the connection that we have with each other. It's this unique bond that we have together. And once we start there, then the skills are a way by which we express love better. And so at no point do I want us to think, and hopefully you'll never hear me say this, and if I did, it would be an accident. At no point is this idea of, if you figure out this one skill, that's going to turn a bad marriage into a good one. It's not that. Instead, what happens is, if you can get the affection and the connection strong, then this skill will make life easier. Now, it's not as clear-cut as it's simply heart and then mind. It's not as clear-cut as that, because the truth of the matter is, for many couples, the issues that we're facing here are so significant that the lack of skill is actually hurting our connection. And to improve the skill might make the connection better. But at all times, I want us to thinking first and foremost about the emotional connection, and then the skill submits to that in some way. So tonight, we're going to talk about the first skill that we're really going to look at is the skill of reconnection. Whenever a couple feels a disconnect in their relationship, how is it and how quickly can they then reconnect? So the average couple thinks that marital success is found by minimizing conflict. And so a lot of couples will think that their biggest problem is actually conflict. What they don't see is what is actually going on below the surface. And so there are some very happy couples who, because of personality, because of temperament, they actually have what we would consider a high conflict marriage. And yet they're happily married. Whereas there are some other couples who have a no conflict marriage, and they are unhappily married. The actual issue is not conflict itself. As a matter of fact, having less conflict can make marriage easier, but it doesn't turn a cold relationship into a warm one. And so, if you would say right now, there's just a coldness between us. And it's not a temporary coldness. It's not a concept of something happened on the way here and y'all had a disagreement and now you're coming to married life and you were all excited about the evening and now you're uncomfortable with even looking at each other and afraid about what I'm going to say lest I touch on the very disagreement that you had on the way here. Not that any of you would have a disagreement on the way to church. I know that would never happen. Jenny and I never do because we never ride together. It just makes it easier as far as that goes. I don't think we've ever had a disagreement on the way to church because we've always rode in separate cars. So there's some married advice for you right there. But here's the thing. Sometimes less conflict is actually a sign of marital distress. And so Gottman would actually say marriages that end, only 40% of them would be characterized as having high conflict. 60% actually don't die with a shout, they die with silence. And so there are some relationships, probably even in this room, in which one of the spouses could be thinking, we've got a pretty good marriage. We never fight. And they have taken that, what I would call the pseudo peace, and mistaken it and used it to misdiagnose the relationship as good. And let's be honest, here's how this often happens. Especially if you have an avoidant man, he looks at the lack of conflict and goes, we're doing pretty good. Not recognizing that his wife's heart is actually dying and the silence is a sign of the problem. So we can't look at conflict in and of itself as the determining factor of what's going on. Now, let's be honest. Unnecessary conflict should be eliminated. Life is hard enough. Don't make it harder. And so if there are issues that we can work through, that we can figure out, that we can solve, then we should do away with that. We're going to have enough tension that we don't have to create new things to fight about. And so if there are skills that we can learn, if there's issues that we can settle, let's settle them so that they don't create a tension between us any longer. But notice this, happiness has less to do with conflict and more to do with connection. So connection truly is the issue now, far more than anything else. And so the couple that fights a lot, who's happily married, what allows that to happen? They feel deeply connected to each other. And they have also found a way, and a lot of it, again, is temperament. They have also found a way to make sure that that conflict does not erode away at that connection. So while their voices might be louder, their personalities might be bigger. I think about a really good Italian marriage, right? There's just kind of a cultural thing that's going on there, but how they talk to each other, how they fight, how they use that volume does not erode away at the trust and the respect and the vulnerability and the personhood of each other. Instead, they're deeply connected there, and therefore the high conflict doesn't bother them. At the same time, show me a couple who is extremely respectful to one another, no conflict whatsoever, and yet there is an emotional coldness in what's going on. And you would almost at sometimes see a heart that wants conflict just to see, do you care at all anymore? And so we have to keep on coming back to this idea of connection with one another. But here's the truth. Friction is inevitable. Reconnection is the skill. So I don't know if you saw the video I had today, right? I had a plug-in, and just this idea of life will kind of jerk the socket out of the wall. We are going to disconnect. It's just an aspect of life. And yes, we want to minimize that as much as possible. If there's unnecessary disconnections, we want to learn. One of the aspects of the skills here, if we can learn how to do some of these things right, then maybe sometimes where we have been disconnected, we will actually stay connected in that moment. That's what we desire. But the truth of the matter is, for all of us, for every relationship, and the cool thing about this is, it doesn't just apply to marriage. There's also a parenting aspect that's going on here. There's a friendship friendship aspect that's going on here. As a matter of fact, in many ways, we can turn to our friends and our close friendships as a model of how we should handle marriage, in that our friendships can have these disconnections, and we tend to reconnect with our friends faster than we actually reconnect with our spouses. Now, that's not oh, how does that happen? Oh, we need to prioritize our spouses more. It's not that. It's the truth that our romantic relationships and intimate relationships actually carry more weight with us. And so it sparks within us more of an emotional and physical and actual chemical reaction. Psychologists call it the attachment behavioral system. That whenever our sense of worth, of value, of personhood, of respect, of trust, whenever our sense of what makes us feel like we are somebody is endangered, our bodies actually kick into motion in some way. I was reading this afternoon about horses. I'm not an expert by any means. If this information is wrong, keep it to yourself, because it's a great illustration, right? And it said that a horse's heart lets out 40 times the amount of the kind of electromagnetic field as a human heart. And that when horses are all together, there's a strong force that is taking place to such an extent that one of the horses kind of outside of the group of horses now, whenever they feel threatened, the change in heart rate in that moment is immediately felt through the entire now herd of horses. It's not a herd. I don't know what it is. What is it? It is a herd? Ah, look at me. Okay, so this wild pack of horses, okay. I really should have worked through this illustration before getting up here, right? But the horse on the outside of the herd, the heart changes, and there's such an electromagnetic field that immediately that communicates to every single horse in the herd the moment it is threatened. Your body has the same reactive force. Here's the problem. We don't recognize it. And as important as our friends are to us, and they are important, I don't downplay that at all, your spouse is more important whether you believe it or not. Your parents, your children, there are these basic relationships that help in some way for us to identify ourselves, to figure out who we are, and whenever that is threatened, the first reaction is actually subconscious. We're not even aware of it, and things begin to change to some extent. That's why these kind of things are now so important. It's the idea of how can we now reconnect. So here's the truth that you and I have to realize. You and I can't reconnect if we were never connected. So the foundational idea of this whole thing is that we have to begin to figure out, what does it even mean to be connected? I told the premarital class last night that I think the most surprising thing to me so far, I've been here for 2.5, coming up on 3 years. I think what surprised me so far in being in the married life role that I'm in and teaching these classes is it's not unusual at the end of a class for somebody to come up to me and to say basically this: I didn't even know what a good relationship was. But as I listen to you describe this idea of a spouse who loves you and is for you, as I hear you talk about trust and respect and vulnerability and openness and transparency and honesty, this idea of having a secure base by which you can go home and rest and relax and rejuvenate, by which you can leave that secure base and go explore new things, knowing that you have the support that is back home. All that concept, I didn't know that's what marriage was supposed to be like. Maybe they didn't grow up in that kind of format. Maybe they now have a romantic relationship that isn't characterized by that at all. And in many ways, maybe their romantic relationship mirrors what they experience in their upbringing. That's the only experience they have. And they think, oh, that's what marriage is. And it's not. Marriage is meant to be this very deep connection. And until you and I start walking down the pathway of experiencing what that is like, the whole idea of reconnecting isn't going to make much sense. But here's the good news for the vast majority of the people who are in the room, who might be watching online. Most of us have some semblance of understanding of what a secure connection looks like. Remember what I talked about last week of that idea of plugging your iPhone into the wall to charge it, and it just goes in and it sticks. And at that moment, the phone is now receiving the full charge of the battery. That's what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like, where generally speaking, obviously not every moment, we are so securely connected with each other that as life itself is draining us, it is this relationship that is one of, not the only, but is one of the primary sources that rejuvenate us, that give us a sense of worth and meaning and value, that launch us out into this world. This is where we get our energy comes from this, instead of this relationship now basically sucks the energy out of us. And if you never experienced that in your relationship, I don't, here's the bad news, here's the good news. The bad news is this: I don't have an immediate place to point you, but as your married life pastor, I feel such a responsibility on the issue. I want to know about it, and I want us to create a place that we can point you. That this is too important. If you've never experienced this, you're missing out on what can be one of the greatest privileges of marriage, of what a true connection looks like. So it starts there. And what is that connection? And maybe the easiest way that psychologists explain it in a way that I understand it is this idea that connection is mainly felt. So it's felt. It's not something you just logically see and understand. Now let's talk about that. So if you we've talked about this enough, I think I can use these terms. You'll hear it all throughout this series. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we can walk you through it. But this idea, if you have an avoidant attachment, so if you kind of are avoidant toward intimacy, it means that you are going to lean much more logical, much more linear, much more language. The right side of your brain, right, isn't going to be as fully functioning. And so you're going to look at your relationship from a primary logical concept, and you're going to think to yourself, well, man, and generally gender-wise, anxious tends to be female, avoidant tends to be male, although I'm more anxious. But make your own comments. Okay, so the idea here is you can think to yourself, well, I provide for her. I said I do, and I have, and I provide for her, and look at everything I give her, and all these things. And you can logically go down the list of all the ways that you love her. But does she feel loved? Does she feel it? Not just does she know it logically, and that's important, but does she actually feel seen and valued and taken care of and heard and all those things? Does her experience now feel like it's had a spotlight on it in a positive way that helps you understand who she actually is? If she doesn't feel it, it really doesn't matter. And so let me just ask you, in all your life, when have you most felt? And probably all of us can look back to a caregiver of some type, a mom, a dad, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a teacher, a coach, who that was the adult we can look to and go, they got me. They saw me. They understood me. They didn't just quickly dismiss me or downplay my experience. Instead, they begin to understand me. Jenny and I took, Ella's gone through therapy over several times. Both of our kids have. It's a great thing. We all should experience it at some point. But at various times, we might take them to therapy if they're working through an issue that mom and dad just can't provide that voice, right, in some ways. So we were taking Ella to some therapy, and her counselor asked to see us, then separate. And so Jenny and I went, and the counselor was great. A great lady, and so we were talking. We get done, and Jenny and I get in the car, and we're driving back, and during that talk, the counselor had asked Jenny, "Hey, what's this like?" Let's face it, right? I'm a guy, I'm a dad. Ella's a girl. I mean, the way this works is Jenny does everything for her, and Ella loves me most. That's right. You understand? I mean, it's unfair, but I didn't make the rules. So literally, Jenny sacrifices her life for Ella. And Ella loves me more than anything in the world. Not fair, just life. Not my fault, just life. And so the counselor did a brilliant job in the midst of talking about, the caretaking, all these kind of things, of just asking some questions of Jenny of, hey, what's that like? What's it like at this stage of life, 18, where you thought it would look like this, but now it looks like that, and it's far more demanding upon you, and you're running a business, and we got the church, and we got family, and Kevin's hard enough to be married to. Like, what is that like? And Jenny was able to talk to that. And we get in the car, and we're driving back up to Auburn, and Jenny made the comment of, wow, that was an interesting feeling. And I'm like, yeah, that's what counselors do. Like, this is what happens here. But you could tell in that moment she felt seen in a way that it's not that anybody around her was not trying to see her. It's just that we're all busy. And in that moment, a spotlight was turned onto her experience. And maybe she actually began to think about it even more deeply than what she would naturally. What is that? In that moment, she felt. And so psychologists use that term of feeling felt as a way now to describe what connection truly looks like. So who has ever given that to you in life? And then beyond that, can you think a time in your relationship with your spouse in which you felt that? That I feel like in this moment, he gets me. He sees me. He doesn't understand everything, but he's at least trying to begin to figure it out. And is there a way to communicate to your spouse, hey, you know what? In this moment, man, I really felt connected to you. And to explain to them what it is that they did to make you feel that connection. To assist them. And then have you tried to understand what is it that I can do for you that makes you feel in this way at this moment, right? Jenny sent me a meme a couple of weeks ago. I really should have clarified whether or not I could tell these stories before getting up here tonight, but it's been a busy week. And so, Jenny, communication is not a skill we'll be talking about. Okay, but she sent me a meme. So like the day before, I don't know the circumstances of what really happened, but I'd done a couple things around the house. And so she sent me this meme that maybe some of you have seen, and it was called Chore Play, right? It was just this idea of, hey, you were doing chores, and that's a positive thing, right, for the experience. And so what she was communicating to me in that moment was, hey, when you were cleaning the kitchen yesterday, that actually made me feel felt. You saw me in that moment. And she did a great job communicating to me of what that meant then. What is that for you? I think this is in part, I think, what Chapman was trying to get at with the 5 love languages. Now those have been overplayed and, debunked by counselors and all that kind of stuff. But the general principle of the love languages is useful, of that idea that there are different ways to express that. And can you help your spouse begin to figure out what is more meaningful to you in this specific time and this specific season? What causes you to feel that? That's a great question for you to talk about. So think about this. Here's the power of why connection is this now connected to being felt. It's because feelings can't be debated. You own them. They're yours. You can't tell me what I do and do not feel. Ella will try to do this all the time. I'll be eating something, and I'll say, hey, this is too spicy. And Ella will say, no, it's not. Well, yes, it is to me, not to you. And then Jenny will come to Ella's defense and say, I didn't actually put any spices in there. Okay, that's fine. But somewhere like pepper got connected to something and I got a bite. It's spicy to me. I'm not saying it's spicy for everybody. It's just I don't like any spice. And this is a little hot for me at this moment. You can't debate feelings. We own them, we possess them. You and I can debate whether or not something happened, what was actually said, what you actually did. We can actually debate intent of all these things. You can't debate what I feel. Now notice this. Many of you try to. And it's a fool's game. And it's one of the things we'll talk about this later as we get into patterns. It's one of the patterns you're going to have to start understanding about yourself. If you're trying to tell your spouse what they feel, you are now trying to control something you're not supposed to control. And that is going to lead to friction and frustration and all these negative emotions. Feelings can't be debated. Either you are or you aren't. That's why the whole concept of in the midst of when things have gone wrong and maybe mistakes have been made, it's okay to say, I didn't mean to. That's okay, but you still have to take responsibility for the feeling that was actually felt. Okay, I didn't mean to hurt you, but you were hurt. So let me look at my own actions and take responsibilities, because what we so often do is we so often judge other people by the outcomes of what they do, and we judge ourselves by the intent. And we go, oh, well, I didn't mean to, so it's not that big of a deal. Well, if they said it's a big deal, it is a big deal. And so we can't debate feelings in that moment, and anytime we try to do so, we get into a very dangerous spot. So think about this. Disconnection is not just a byproduct of conflict. It's also a result of life. So often whenever we think about disconnection, the very first thing we think about is, okay, what was the last fight that we had? How did things go wrong? And we're going to look at that in the next session, about that idea of conflict and how to handle it. But before we get there, what we have to focus in on is that life itself will disconnect us. Parenting and careers and sickness and taking care of older parents or taking care of adult children or grandchildren, work at the church, just the demands of life itself will disconnect you, right? So in January, I traveled a lot, I was preaching a lot, and during that time, I got sick. And so my viewpoint whenever I'm sick is leave me alone. I just don't want to be talked to. I don't want to be a burden upon you. And so in order not to be a burden upon you, let's just not speak until I'm well, right? And on top of that, I was still preaching in places, and I got to protect the voice, and there were things I just couldn't get out of. So literally, during the Bible conference, what is it about the Bible conference, by the way, and me and sickness, right? So the one year, remember, we had the healing service, and I got COVID. That's a sign that you're Baptist. Whenever you're actually doing a healing and you get sick, I told Andrew I shouldn't be doing that anyway. And so now this year I got kind of a respiratory thing of some sort. And so we do the whole Bible conference. I preach that weekend someplace. I get home on Monday. I don't leave the bed. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then I fly to Palm Springs, where I'm going to preach for 3 services and do all that. So I was protecting my voice, saving my energy, and all that. Well, think about that. I'm out of commission now for a week. Why? Because I'm a man with a cold, right? So I'm out of commission now. I'm out of commission. It's what men call near death and what women call Tuesday. And so I'm out of commission now for a week. Well, what happens between me and Jenny? She feels like, who are you? Like, I don't know what's going on in your world, in your life in this moment. Nothing happened to create disconnection. It's just life disconnects you. You get busy, you have a busy season at work, you're traveling, you're gone, you're just disconnected. But if you and I only think about disconnection when it comes to conflict, then even if we learn the skill to reconnect, we're only going to try to incorporate that skill when conflict happens, and we're going to miss out on what is probably half, if not more, of the disconnection of life, which is just life itself. And so where I want us to focus on this idea of reconnection in part is this concept of we have to have now intentional patterns of reconnection in the midst of everyday life. Because if we don't, then what's going to happen is we're going to get disconnected, and our brains are actually going to begin to associate conflict with reconnection. And that becomes a very dangerous path then to go down. And some couples experience this in the same way that for a child so desperately needs their parents' attention that if they can't get it through good means, they will actually start acting out. And many parents will unintentionally then begin to give the child attention through discipline and things like that. And in the child's brain, it gets wired together that the only way mom and dad are ever going to see me is actually through bad behavior. And they unconsciously and unknowingly begin to lean toward bad behavior because they so desperately need their parents' attention. There are some couples who, because they don't focus on reconnecting just through life, just through the weariness of life, the only time they ever think about reconnection is as the byproduct of conflict, that they actually begin to pick fights and engage in fights, not intentionally, but subconsciously, just because I need to be seen and heard. And so if you will learn that we have to be intentional about reconnection in every aspect of life, then our brain can start to associate reconnection with these patterns and these habits, and not just the concept of conflict. So here's some possible patterns. You're going to have to form this in your own life. It depends on what season of life you're in. It's going to be different for empty nesters than it is going to be for parents with small kids that are home with all these things. But just think about it in these ways. What do daily check-ins look like? So let's say you're a spouse and she travels, he stays home. There has to be some kind of check-in, some kind of connection point every single day. Let's say you're both working and you're busy and the kids are little, and what is the system by which we're going to check in with each other? And I've talked about it before. This is where it can be a benefit if you can work it. It can be a benefit to get up in the morning together, to go to bed at the same time. If you can do that, you don't have to by any means, but if you can do that, then that provides a climate in which that can take place. But then beyond that, what does that look like? For me and Jenny, it can very commonly be just an ongoing kind of text string of conversation that in some ways might be taking care of the business of marriage, but in other ways might just be a communication of how are things going. We need to have a way to figure out how is your day today, and in so doing, how's your heart? And beyond just the daily check-in now, weekly conversations. And so for some, you might be so busy, it might only be one conversation. One conversation a week is not going to be enough for me. I'm going to need more than that. I'm going to need, this is why Jenny and I try when the weather's good enough that we go on walks, 3 or 4 times a week. And so then it's assuring us 45 to 50 minutes together of conversation 3 or 4 times a week. And if we have that, we stay pretty connected. If the weather gets bad, we don't have that, work gets busy, all those things, and we don't have that time and we don't form it someplace else, then we can feel disconnected. I've told you before, I mean it, it's true. I can feel when we haven't taken a walk in a while. It's not about the walk. It's about these weekly conversations beyond just who's taking care of the kids and what's going on. It is this ongoing connection that is taking place. And then third is monthly fun. So is there a way to step out of the day-to-day of the relationship of what's going on? I will have to admit that with my son in the tunnel right here watching this marriage talk, it changes everything. I am so keenly aware of your presence right now. It's hilarious. And so let's talk about sex. And see ya. My first sermon here by myself, we were going through 1 Corinthians, and it was on the topic of sex. And Silas was like, are you serious? Like, this is going to be your introduction to these people. And so I called him out, and I had him stand, and just everybody could say hello. But this idea of monthly fun, that there are times in which we step out of the day-to-day, we step out of all these things. For some of you, this is a date night kind of thing. Let's face it, when kids are little, and your working jobs, the idea of a weekly date night to me feels impossible. Now, maybe you figured it out. If you have, great. But I think this idea of once a month, just finding a way to spend more time together. Maybe you're playing pickleball with another couple. Maybe you invite people over and it's a Friday night and you slow down. Whatever it is that allows the two of you to get beyond just the work and the day-to-day and step out and relax and to see each other in that context. And then the concept of a yearly escape. It doesn't mean that you have to spend tons of money. It doesn't mean that kind of thing. But it does mean that for 4 or 5 days, we're going to step out of the pattern and the routines by which we have been living, and now we're going to reconnect. Jenny and I just got back from a vacation a couple of weeks ago, and what's interesting to me is you can get in these habits and not even realize it. And so I've been giving this advice for years. We've been living it out for years. But one thing Jenny and I realized whenever we got to this vacation is what we had actually done since COVID is instead of taking a vacation to go vacation, what we had done is whenever I was speaking someplace nice, she would come with me and we would add a couple days. And it's great. I mean, the whole thing is a tax write-off, right? The vacation's paid for, all those kind of things, right? I mean, it's smart, it's cheap. It's a cheap way to do it. Here's the downside. Here's what we recognize. We weren't ever really off. We were just tagging on a couple days to a work trip. So for the first couple days, my mind was really focused on what we're going to say and how can we do this. We had to navigate all those things. We were kind of tied down to what's going on. And we get onto the site of what is this vacation now. It's pretty short, actually, for us, but just 4 or 5 days, actually. And we get there and we recognize, oh, we don't have any responsibilities. And there was just this relaxation that began to take place. And it's amazing to me. To me, the yearly vacation is the equivalent of turning your phone off and turning it back on. It's the reboot. It just kind of can clear, if you're in a healthy spot, it just rejuvenates and refreshes everything. You and I need to create these habits in our lives just from the busyness of marriage. Think about at this moment. What are the things in your marriage that are causing disconnection that aren't conflict? How many hours are you working? Maybe mom's sick or dad's sick, kids are little, you got teenagers, and so you're a taxi cab that's running all over the different places. Maybe it's a specific season at work that's extremely busy. Maybe you're an accountant and you're right in the middle of tax season, and you just know there's a disconnect that happens. I'm a son of an accountant. I remember what February, March, and early April were like. You just didn't see Dad as much, and suddenly April 15th happened, and oh, Dad's back. How great is this? There's no fault there. That's just life. But there's a disconnection that happens as we live life. Are you being intentional about creating patterns by which you can reconnect?